The night was a hollow place when Clara May stumbled into the barn, her breath snagging like cloth on thorns. Moonlight spilled through crooked wooden slats, thin silver blades that cut across the dust-filled air. Her dress was torn at the hem, her hair wild with the day's wind, and her knees bore the raw redness of running. The scent of hay, leather, and horse sweat crowded her lungs until she whispered, as if bargaining with the shadows themselves, "Don't hurt me. I'll be your wife." The words tumbled from her mouth, not as an offering of love, but as the last weapon of a cornered animal. She had spoken them before to other men, older men, hungrier men, and it had been the only currency she knew. A life traded for a body, a future bartered away for one night's safety. She stood there trembling, waiting for hands to seize her, for laughter to crackle like firewood, but none came. Instead, a man sat quietly on a bale of hay, the lantern at his boots, drawing out the shape of his shoulders. Silas Boone. He had been mending a harness when she appeared, the leather strap dangling forgotten in his hand. His hat was pushed back, his jaw shadowed with days of silence. He looked at her as though she were not a stranger intruding on his night, but a wild animal caught in a trap, dangerous in her desperation, fragile in her fear. He did not move closer. He did not rise. His voice came steady, low as a river's current. "No one here's gonna hurt you." The barn creaked around, them rafters sighing in the night wind. The horse shifted in its stall, snorted softly, a sound so ordinary it made her want to scream. Her heart pounded, as if to remind her she was still alive. She blinked, waiting for the catch, the trick, the sudden lunge. But Silas only stayed where he was, elbows resting loosely on his knees, eyes quiet. Her shame flared hot across her cheeks. She had offered herself, without hesitation, like bread thrown before dogs, and he had not even reached for her. She hated the burn of it, the humiliation that twisted inside her chest. Her voice cracked. "I just needed a place. Only for the night." He said nothing, and the silence widened until it was unbearable. Clara filled it with fragments she had never meant to give away. How she had fled the wagon train, how her uncle had promised her to a man twice her age, a man with heavy hands and a laugh that made her stomach turn. How she had slipped away under cover of darkness, walking until her shoes split and her knees bled. The story fell from her mouth in shreds, as though speaking it aloud made it less real, less heavy. Through it all, Silas listened. He did not press her, did not demand details or bargain with her pain. His hands remained steady on the leather strap, his gaze lowered when her tears blurred her sight. His listening felt heavier than any judgment. For the first time in months, maybe years, someone gave her silence instead of command. When at last her words ran out, she felt hollowed, emptied. The barn's lantern flickered low, painting her face in trembling light. She waited for him to speak, to take what he was owed for her confession. Instead, he rose slowly, moving with a gentleness that startled her more than violence ever had. From a shelf, he drew down a folded blanket. Without stepping too near, he set it on the straw before her. "You're safe here tonight," he said, and that was all. Her throat tightened. She wanted to reject it, to spit that she needed no man's pity, but her body betrayed her. She sank to her knees, drawing the blanket around her shoulders like armor. The coarse wool scratched her skin, yet it warmed her in a way she had forgotten. Warmth could. A cup of water followed. He offered it from a distance, his hand outstretched but not reaching. She hesitated. Trust had never been a word in her vocabulary, but her thirst burned hotter than her fear. She took the cup, her fingers trembling as they brushed his. The touch lingered brief, accidental, and yet it set her heart stumbling in her chest. She drank, water spilling down her chin, and felt something shift inside her. Not safety, not yet, but the faint echo of it. Outside, the night stretched on, coyotes calling to one another across the plains. She tried to sleep, but her mind rattled with the barn's shadows. She remembered his stillness, the refusal in his quiet. She remembered that he had not taken her when she had offered herself like a coin. That thought carried her into sleep, uneasy but whole. Morning broke with the sound of boots in gravel. Clara stepped from the barn, wrapped in the blanket, hair loose, face pale. Martha Odell, the innkeeper, stood in the street. Her sharp eyes narrowed, and her mouth twisted into the shape of a story. By noon, the whispers had spread like prairie. Fire, she offered herself. He took her in. Another lost girl at the mercy of a cowboy. The words chased Clara through the day, sharper than knives. She scrubbed her hands raw at the water pump, unable to rid herself of the feeling that every eye in town was upon her. Shame pressed down like a yoke. She considered running again, fleeing into the wilderness where at least the judgment would come from hunger and wolves, not human voices. That evening, she found Silas repairing the corral fence, his hat low against the sun. "I should go," she murmured, her voice thin. "They're saying things." He did not look up. He drove a nail into the post with steady strikes. "Let Em talk," he said at last. "They don't know what it costs to survive." The words sank into her, like stones into water. He spoke them not as comfort, but as truth. They did not erase the sting of gossip, but they gave her something firmer to stand on. She watched him work, sweat streaking his temple, muscles moving beneath his shirt. He was not a man of declarations. He was a man of small, deliberate acts. And those, she realized, carried more weight than any promise. That night, she lay awake. In the spare room he had given her, the ceiling beams above carved with years of weather. The house smelled of pine and dust, and the faint leather of his saddle. Through the thin walls, she heard the sounds of night, the low hum of coyotes, the rustle of wind through the eaves, the porch boards groaning beneath his boots as he walked. His rounds, her eyes stung with tears, she did not understand. It was not fear that held her awake. It was the strange, fragile recognition that he had not taken her body when she had offered it. Instead, he had given her back a piece of herself she thought long buried, as sleep finally pulled her under. She whispered into the dark, "Not for him, but for herself. He didn't take me. He gave me back something I'd forgotten I had." And though the gossip roared outside those walls, in the hush of that house she felt a flicker of strength she had thought lost forever. The days that followed were slow, measured by the sound of hammer on wood, the rattle of buckets, and the stretch of sky that seemed to widen whenever Clara May dared to look up. The blanket he had given her became a kind of armor, draped over her shoulders when she stepped outside, though she knew every eye in town still carved its own version of her story. At first, she shrank from the looks, convinced that each whisper confirmed her worthlessness. Yet Silas Boone's silence had begun to work on her like water wearing down stone. She took to rising early, before the sun had burned the mist off the fields. She would walk the fence lines, touching the posts as if they could steady her, the damp grass soaking her skirts. One morning, Elias Crow, the foreman, caught her at it. His voice was blunt, his words carrying the bite of distrust. "She'll bring trouble here. Strays always do." Clara felt the sting as if it were a lash across her back. She wanted to, shrank, to run again, but Silas only handed her a pair of gloves and said, "Everyone deserves a fair chance." The gloves were rough, the leather stiff against her fingers. She slid them on anyway. That single act, his unspoken faith, rooted her more than any chain could. She found herself mending fences, fetching water, scrubbing tools. Her body ached in new ways, but it was a cleaner pain, one earned through effort rather than shame. With each day, her hands grew tougher, her back straighter. She began to wonder if maybe survival wasn't the only thing she was capable of. When Sunday came, Silas told her she didn't have to go, but she wanted to see the inside of a church again, even if it meant facing their eyes. Together, they walked down the main street, dust curling around their boots. The moment she stepped into the church, Silence fell. Fans stopped mid-wave. Children tugged back against their mothers' skirts. The preacher's words that morning were sharp with insinuation, circling sin and temptation, until they cut more keenly than the whispering pews. Clara lowered her head, cheeks aflame, wishing she could fold herself into the floorboards. But Silas stood steady beside her, his frame like a wall, unmoving, shielding. He did not defend her with words, he didn't need to. His refusal to bend, to flinch, became its own kind of sermon. That night, she sat on the porch while he smoked in silence, the cicadas thrumming in the dark. The fireflies rose like sparks over the fields. She found herself saying, almost to herself, I thought, church would feel like God's house, but it felt like judgment's. He tapped ash into the dirt and replied, judgment ain't the same as truth. It was the kind of line that might have seemed simple if spoken by another man, but in his voice it carried weight. She tucked it away like a coin to spend later when courage failed her. The days stretched. She grew accustomed to the rhythm of ranch life. Yet in the corners of town, the whispers grew sharper. Martha Odell's voice was the loudest, her gossip spilling from the saloon door like spilled whiskey. She's ruined, and she ruined him too. What began as mutterings became pointed stares, then cold shoulders at the mercantile. Clara bore it with bent shoulders, but each word reopened old wounds. She feared she was poison to any place she settled. Then came the night of fire. Clara woke to the smell of smoke, thick and choking, filling her throat with panic. Shouts rang outside, men's voices carrying the hard edge of judgment turned to action. She stumbled into the yard, eyes burning, to find the barn ablaze. Flames climbed the wooden frame, a roaring red that lit the night sky. Silas was already there, bucket in hand, his movements deliberate against the chaos. The townsmen stood nearby, their faces half lit by the inferno, muttering, let it burn. She ain't worth the ruin. For a moment, fear rooted Clara in place. She had seen men destroy everything before. She had been taught that when destruction came, a woman's place was to beg or to run. But something inside her shifted then, something born not of shame but of defiance. She seized a bucket, her dress catching sparks as she ran beside Silas. Together they fought the fire, water hissing against flame, smoke blackening their skin. Her lungs burned, her arms ached, but she did not falter. With each throw of water, she felt the weight of her own courage growing, solidifying. When the flames finally surrendered to embers, Clara collapsed against a fence post, coughing, her hair clinging damp to her cheeks. Silas sat beside her, equally spent, his shirt dark, with sweat and soot. The night was quiet now, broken only by the crackle of what was left of the barn. She turned to him, voice raw. I thought offering myself was all I was worth, but you never touched me. He looked at her, eyes steady as ever, and said, almost gently, a woman's worth ain't in what she gives, it's in who she is. His words were plain, but they struck like scripture. Her tears fell freely then, not from fear, not from humiliation, but from the release of something she had carried too long. In the days that followed, the barn was rebuilt, slower than before, but stronger. Clara worked alongside the men, her blistered hands proof of her resolve. The townsfolk still whispered, but when they saw her hauling timber, hauling water, standing shoulder to shoulder with Silas, some of the whispers faltered. Her courage had been forged in fire, visible now in every step she took. One afternoon, when Martha muttered again in the mercantile, Clara turned and faced her. Her chin lifted, her voice clear. I don't need to be anyone's bargain. I'm staying because I choose to. The room hushed. Even the creak of floorboards seemed to pause. Martha's lips pressed thin, but no words came. For the first time, Clara felt the silence not as condemnation, but as space room for her to stand tall. That night, under the wide prairie sky, she sat beside Silas on the porch. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. The air was heavy, with crickets, the stars endless above. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe life could be more than fleeing, more than bargaining. Maybe it could be chosen. And as the night deepened, she thought of the lesson carved into her days with him, that sometimes the strongest love is not the one that demands, but the one that waits, that listens. In that listening, she had found the space to rise. The horizon held no promises, only distance, but she felt ready to meet it. She was no longer a plea in the dark, no longer a bargain whispered in shame. She was Clara May, and she was still standing, and though her story was far from over, for the first time, she was not afraid of what came next.